Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm Mary Beth Keelty, and I'm the CMO at ForwardPMX Agency, which is a global brand performance group. And we're here with our renowned digital-first creative agency, Code and Theory, which we're both part of the Sagwell Group. Before we start, it does go without saying that 2020 has been an incredibly unprecedented year, from health challenges, social challenges, as well as economic challenges. So first and foremost, we do hope that you are all safe and your families are all safe and taking care of yourselves. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about conversion rate optimization and how you can start to build a winning strategy through user experience. Through COVID-19, obviously, there's been a huge push for brands to go online, and consumers have been going online more than ever before. So it's so incredibly important to have a strong online presence and experience. So we're going to talk about that today. To help us dig into the ways that brands can maximize their online presence, we have a group from both Code and ForwardPMX that I can introduce now. We're here with Joel and Nick from ForwardPMX that are some of the leaders from our consultancy and product lead group, and then also Mike Treff, who is the president of Code and Theory. So with that, just a few housekeeping things. We are recording the presentation. We will send that out after. We will have about 30 minutes of content, and then we'll open up to Q&A. You can use the Q&A feature in your toolbar to ask questions, and we will get to them at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joel and Nick. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And hello, everyone. So I think I just wanted to set the scene a little bit before we go into a bit more of the detail around the what and the why of CRO and of UX by talking a bit about the present situation that we're in and trying to differentiate between what we see as kind of two separate but kind of interlinked phases. So if you wouldn't mind moving on, Mary Beth. Thanks. So what we have is the pandemic, of course. So that is a global health emergency. It has forced a whole raft of behavior changes amongst consumers. I say consumers, I mean people. I mean you and I, for example. I had never made an online grocery order before the last couple of months, and now I have. So the pandemic itself and lockdowns and so on has forced people into behaviors, typically online behaviors that they were not previously kind of doing, and also taking them away from offline behaviors, clearly. And that's had a massive impact on business of different types. Some have done okay, and many more have really struggled. And really it's the businesses that are able to develop, maintain a strong online presence that have actually weathered the kind of pandemic phase better. I think the other thing about the pandemic element is, of course, that we may get a second spike, that it does tend to reach a peak at different points around the world. So there's one country that's coming out of lockdown, another one may be working its way towards the peak, and that may well happen again if we get a second phase, maybe come winter. So whilst for many markets where it feels like things are opening up again, and that's very positive, there is likely to be an enduring impact. But the other phase, of course, is the economic impact and a recession that we are already in and will be of uncertain duration, particularly as we understand how the pandemic itself is going to play out. So the actions that you can take in a pandemic are some of which will remain post-pandemic, and the actions you'll take during a recession, they may be similar, but some of them may change over time. For example, your ability to serve business clients during a pandemic may be impacted because you don't have an offline presence that people can interface with. You have struggles with logistics and fulfillment and all those kind of things. Those sort of things you would not expect to remain during a when that pandemic phase is over and when you're in just the economic downturn, at which point you're facing an issue of simply trying to find business. What we do know is that in either event, regardless of the phase we're in or the duration of the phases, a very strong online presence is now absolutely necessity. And the gains made now will be enduring. So if your business is being forced online, then any improvements you can make to how you manage your business online now during very testing periods will be repaid many times over once the general global situation improves. Also, often, where businesses are no longer able to operate offline for a period, it does mean that there's room there to focus a bit more on online. So it's from that perspective where maybe internal resources kind of less dissipated, it can be a bit more focused on online. So now is a kind of a good time to try and make some of those positive changes. So with that, I will hand you over to Nick to go into a bit more on the whys and wherefores of CRO. Over to you, Nick.
Great, thanks, Joel. Yeah, so I'm going to take you through definition of CRO, talking about the kind of opportunities for businesses that find themselves in different kinds of situation at the moment, in the current situation. And then I'll go through a kind of process of CRO and some of the measurements that you'll be looking at using, and then also some examples of kind of successful experiments. Can you go to the next slide? Great. So we all know the current situation is a highly unusual situation, and it's producing highly unusual consumer behavior, as Joel was speaking to. So some sectors are experiencing spikes of demand, and this data is from Google Trends. Home improvements is up 130% in the US. That's search volume. Home fitness, resistance bands and the like, up 220% in EMEA. Home food delivery, Uber Eats, up as well. So as we know, we've all been forced indoors, and so we're searching for different things. And some sectors are experiencing challenges and demands. Airlines, the automobile industry, and luxury fashion has been affected. But there is this overall trend that e-commerce is booming. Desktop conversions, interestingly, are up 13% in the US, and the e-commerce sector is still set to grow year on year in 2020, despite coronavirus. US online orders as a whole increased 56%. And there's this really interesting trend of demographics who wouldn't previously have shopped so much online are now shopping online, such as older consumers, silver surfers. And this is from McKinsey COVID reports. So some of this growth, oh, sorry, do you mind if we go back one real quick? Sorry. So some of this growth is clearly situational. Some of it will go away. Not all of it will go away. When people can go back to shops, you're likely to see some enduring trends in that behavior. But there is this overall trend toward e-commerce. Thank you. So enter CRO. So conversion rate optimization is a tactical and strategic play to make it easier for consumers to make an online purchase on your website. So it's a series of activities that focuses on making it easier for a customer to find what they want and to buy it. And it's clearly a subset of or closely related to UX. Typically, would be enhancing the UX process. For for your in-house or digital development agency. So conversion rate optimization would, take ideas from quantitative and qualitative data, and kind of bring that into a series of kind of tactical experiments, which overall would support the strategic direction of your digital strategy. Next slide, please. So what's the play of CRO within the different kind of segments I was talking about earlier? So if you're one of these sectors who are experiencing a spike of demand, investing in on-site conversion is quite simply going to help you capture and convert that spike of demand now and in the future. For sectors that are experiencing challenges in demand at the moment, it's still worth it, because you'll be in a stronger position to capture the demand when it returns. And there is this general trend towards e-commerce, as some of the stats in the previous few slides have shown. And so it is really worth, at this point, investing in your digital shopfront. So what are the KPIs for CRO? So ultimately, revenue is going to be the top line metric, particularly if you're an e-commerce shop. Obviously, there will be different metrics if you're a newspaper or other kinds of websites. But taking the assumption that you're an e-commerce shop, revenue is your top line metric, and so obviously that's formed of transactions times average order value, and then sessions times conversion rate equals transactions. And here we're specifically looking at moving the conversion rate number. So in the process of starting a CRO campaign, I mean, you would negotiate these, or you would discuss these KPIs, but typically your primary KPI would be conversion rate, but actually the really important KPIs will be your secondary KPIs, which will be the numbers that you'll be looking to move in each individual experiment. And those will be like your homepage click-through rates, the checkout drop-off, and those kind of micro conversions that together form your ultimate conversion rate. Next slide, please. So, so the point of CRO really is that it has a robust methodology which is measurable, provable, and it has an impact which is demonstrable using data. And you go through this process, or an adapted version of this process, to achieve implementing your experiments. So typically you'd have a sort of pre-live phase and a post-live phase. So your first phase would be research, where you delve into the quantitative and qualitative data available to you. So Google Analytics, sales data, user testing, user interviews, heat maps, scroll maps, click maps, and you'd formulate a series of insights, which would then go into hypotheses for testing, and then you formulate particular experiments to test off the back of those hypotheses. And then you would build the experiments in a tool using, such as Google Optimize or Optimizely, and then set it live, get the results after you've reached statistical significance in that experiment, which is the percentage likelihood that the results of the experiment are not due to chance. And calculating that in advance is really important, as is prioritizing different experiments according to the impacts they're going to have, your confidence in the experiment being successful, and the ease of implementing the experiment. And then you'll ultimately look at the results and take a view as to whether you should discontinue the experiment or continue it, and whether it's a win or a loss. If it's a win, you might want to implement it as a permanent feature on your website. If it's a loss, you won't necessarily, it's not a loss in terms of time. You've still learned something, and then you can look at trying something else. We can go to the next one, please. So what does this look like over a sample quarter? So typically in month 1, you would complete your research, you'd provide insights, you design experiments, and then in month 2 and 3, you'd go into a kind of implementation, results, analysis, iterative, cyclical series of sprints. Next slide, please. So what are the capabilities you need to be able to implement this kind of experimentation? So depending on your internal setup as a brand, you may have some of these pieces already, but basically you can layer in. Agency side can layer into the client side kind of capabilities very flexibly. So obviously you need to be able to coordinate everything. You need the ability to implement the experiments using JavaScript in a tool such as Google Optimize or Optimizely. You need to have that design capability. You need to be able to analyze the results, and then there might be an element of copywriting. And it's important to collaborate with your channel marketing colleagues so that you can coordinate, for example, if a conversion rate rises due to an experiment. Next slide, please. So now we're going to delve into some quick examples of experiments which worked well and which have driven an impact. All the experiments chosen in this particular set have been successful, but by no means all experiments are successful. In fact, a Harvard Business Review article using Optimizely data confirmed that only 1 in 10 experiments are actually successful. And the reason for that is that, well, the benefit from the overall process is that you learn either way. If an experiment is successful, you learn because you've created a performance upside. If an experiment isn't successful, you've saved money because you haven't invested in making a feature which potentially wasn't going to be successful. So it's both useful to learn either way. And the more experiments you run, the more you learn, the more likely you are to drive successful results overall. But this is a selection of successful ones. And unfortunately, we've had to anonymize these particular experiments, but they are results of real experiments. So, and this gives you a kind of flavor of the kind of documentation, which means that you can keep track of your hypothesis, the visual design, and the insight that started off the whole kind of experiment. So, in this case, we did some analysis on the desktop users. We created a segment who viewed a gifting page. We noticed their average order value was 7% higher, but the gifting page wasn't on the navigation, and we thought that we would include a link to it on the navigation, and that we hypothesized we would increase revenue by 10%. Next slide, please. So here's what it would look like. We've anonymized the brand. But you can see that the navigation is different on the right-hand side. We included gifts in the navigation on the right-hand side. If you can slip to the next slide. And the result was 100% more revenue in the segment who saw the gifts page to those who didn't, which is very, it's an interesting result. And also, I think it proves the importance of navigation. Navigation is, potentially a very powerful driver of people finding what they want. It's very important to get that right. Next, please. Yeah, so a site with very high average order value, in this case a jewelry site, and we're looking for opportunities to improve the late stage of the funnel. So so this is a very simple classic test, and we're going to change the color of the add to bag button. We think we're going to reduce the abandonment rate. We can go to the next one. So this is the experiment. Very simple button change. And remarkably, 51% increase in transactions compared to the control group. Next slide, please. Although I have to say there were also many failed experiments that led to that successful experiment with other colors. So here's a different anonymized website, this time on desktop, and this time at the end of the user funnel in the checkout funnel. There's an abandonment rate of 9% on the shipping page, and we think trust logos are going to reduce the abandonment rate. And it did. And the difference, this is a high revenue website. The difference, you can see the difference between 418K and about 428K. It's actually quite small, but over a year, that's a difference in revenue of 180K dollars. So if, especially at scale, small differences yield significant results. And the next experiment is actually very similar. It's mobile, and it's a slightly different. It's a slightly different part of the checkout process. But this is the cart page, and I think this really signals the importance of trust in, particularly on mobile, having trust in your payment experience. Signaling that directly can actually yield surprisingly significant results. So yeah, that also had quite a significant impact. So the result of those two quite simple experiments yielded an extra 450K for that particular company over a year.
All right. Well, hey, I'm Mike from Code and Theory. Now we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the future of e-commerce and some examples of who's doing it really well today and what it really means to run e-commerce from a experience design and user experience perspective. So first, just definitionally, when we think about how e-commerce has changed, it used to be you put a cart on a website and all of a sudden you're e-commerce enabled. And it's certainly a bit more complex. As my colleagues have pointed out, it involves the whole ecosystem. It involves how you're driving demand generation. What are you doing to run experiments to optimize? How are you doing retargeting and more performance marketing to drive conversion and drive revenue? But certainly, the expectations have changed. Consumer expectations are fundamentally different for what they expect to see on an e-commerce website today versus even 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago. It's much more than the cart. It's about personalized, relevant, self-directed experiences for all segments of your customers. And depending on what type of brand you are, what type of company you are, what your products and services that you're selling are, I'm sure you have different segments of consumers. So, when we think about how brands need to think about e-commerce today, we really think about accomplishing three things. And the first thing is helping customers self-serve from discovery to comparison to conversion. And that means making sure that there's a guided experience. That means making sure that help is available whenever they may need it. And we'll go deeper into each of these three and show some examples. Second, we want to make sure that we gain annuity from marketing and specifically content marketing by leveraging it in the funnel. There are certainly questions that come up about how you balance between brand marketing and content and hardcore conversion optimization on a page. And there are lots of experiments and hypotheses to test and validate in doing that. But we would argue that that's a bit of a false choice. And we'll talk about why in a second. And then third, e-commerce is about building better business intelligence and using it to better serve your customers. What products are people interested in? What type of content helps convert? Where do we see abandonment? How can we better service our customer needs and build better business intelligence as we do so? So breaking that down, that first point around helping customers self-serve from discovery to comparison to conversion, what this really means is that have when they hit your site and when they want to engage in looking at discovery and conversion around your products. Oftentimes, and I think this goes to the point that was just previously made around navigation, a lot of companies sort of present their company or organizational structure as their e-commerce navigation or taxonomy, and that really doesn't help consumers. Secondarily, consumers know what they need most of the time when they get to a commerce environment, or at least they have an idea of what they're looking for. And if that's true, they may only want to deal with a person when they want to, and that's okay. We work in many categories where some of the transactions have to happen with a human being, things like life insurance. But there are often times where they don't. But having omnipresent help available should the consumer need it is just a nice way to help guide consumers. And that's really what we mean there. If they want to be self-directed and move through the entire commerce experience on their own, from a UX perspective, that's fine. But if they want help, we should always make it available for them in whatever format they want, whether that's chat, whether that's call, etc. So let's look at a couple examples of companies doing this well. And some of these will be familiar to you. But certainly, 15 years ago, if you had said people are going to be buying $100,000 cars online without test driving them and pre-ordering them, the world would have thought you were insane. But that's actually true. And then when you think about, there's probably on average, I think it's 200 customizations that you could make when configuring a car. And I don't just mean Tesla, I mean in aggregate. But Tesla's found a really simple and easy way to take what is traditionally a laborious and an in-person interaction that's riddled with distrust and turned it into an incredibly pleasant self-service environment that's simple, it's exciting, it's fun, it builds up momentum and excitement around that purchase experience. It takes very complicated things like car configurators and makes it very simple. It's highly transparent, as you see here, in terms of showing you the information as you move through that funnel. And it's simple. And the results speak for themselves in terms of what they've been able to do. Another company doing it really well, and this is an obvious one, but is Apple. Yes, everyone cites Apple. There's a reason. They're really good at this. And what they do is they really employ a UX principle called progressive disclosure. And I'm just going to let it play as we talk about that. But certainly this video, just to warn you, it's in like 3x speed. So just try to not get nauseous when you watch it, but we wanted to get through showing you a lot of the site experience. But certainly what you see here and what we mean by progressive surfacing of information is that they never overwhelm you. And a lot of e-commerce experiences make this mistake. They bombard you with so much information and it's so overwhelming, either on the category page or the product detail page, that the user just abandons. And we see that. We see that on bounce rate, right? Sometimes that's about qualified traffic. Sometimes there's other reasons, but oftentimes it's just simply there's too much information in the way. And so we believe, and we've seen tremendous success in employing what we like to call progressive disclosure, giving the user enough information so they can continue to progress through a funnel, through a category page, through a product comparison, through a product detail page, or through a checkout experience without overwhelming them so they abandon. And if they want to go deeper, they certainly can. And you see that on Apple. If someone wants to go deep on the specs, they can, but every spec is not on that page when you land there. And that's what we mean by progressive disclosure and sort of self-guided experiences. So where to begin? In order to really help customers self-serve, you got to do we have three rules. Rule number one, progressively disclose information. We just hit that one nail on the head. And there's a lot of experiments that can be done around that. How much information is too much? How do we optimize that? Maybe for a first-time visitor, you want a little less information. Maybe for the third-time visitor to the product detail page on that person's third visit, you maybe want to expose the specs a bit more. Things of that nature where you can really experiment not only with how much you're showing, but with which visit is that user on, and then customize that page to them. The second, unobtrusive and omnipresent help. Again, if customers want to self-direct through the funnel, great. If they want help, make sure it's available, whether it's chat or call, or contact or email. Just don't hide it. And then lastly, purchasing and account management to be self-service, making sure that if people set up an account that they really have real preference and system management there, while also collecting information on users so that you can use it better for retargeting or recommendations or performance marketing, not in a creepy way, but in a useful way as you do that. So that's the first principle. Second, gaining annuity from content marketing by leveraging it in the funnel. And this is the classic, again, this is a classic choice. How much content is too much in the funnel? And the answer is, it depends. People love to set up that classic dichotomy. Is this about conversion or is this about brand building? And really it's a false choice. It's different for different people. It's different for different usage. It's different for different occasion. It's different for different products. I don't think anyone would say that the content that we just looked at on Tesla or Apple isn't brand building. Of course it is. So what we mean by this is content can start, and for any of the marketers on the call, content can start in distributed environments, in paid media, in social, in owned social, etc. But we want to continue those narratives back on the website, back in the commerce environment. It should drive people to that platform and continue that storytelling and use the content to pull people through the funnel. That is what we mean by gaining annuity from content marketing, by leveraging it in the funnel. And certainly there's a few examples who do it well. Nike does this incredibly well. You know, when you think about a customer journey that starts on Instagram with a hero piece of content that maybe highlights people, highlights influencers, highlights the product benefits, and then you drive that person back to Nike.com, which does a great job of continuing that narrative, showing the benefits of the product, showing people using it, etc., which then down on a product detail page really highlights wearability, usage, function, etc. You know, different. Again, starting on the left with very hero, sort of inspirational content, continuing that narrative in the land state, and then driving deeper into the product detail page. But it doesn't end there. You know, once they convert, whether it's the training app or the Run Club app or using it in CRM and email marketing, they continue these narratives. So whether it's showing different people using products differently, different influencers, different workout regimens, different activities that you could do either singularly or progressively with people, and then certainly continuing it back in your inbox later, which is, you know, CRM does very well with driving back to conversion and repeat purchase. They just do a great job of using content throughout that ecosystem and through the funnel to pull people through. Another great example is Goop. You know, certainly for anyone who is a fan of this brand, they know that they really do lead with content, but the content isn't just for the sake of content. It's about people, it's about product, it's about application, it's about usage, it's building momentum and excitement around products, it's offering new things like boxes and explaining the value of them. And it really goes all the way through off-platform distribution and Instagram and paid media, onto the .com, into the apps, and then through the email marketing. And oftentimes, I think I just want to make this quick point, you know, organizational structures inhibit clients' ability to do this. Sometimes, you know, CRM sits off on the left somewhere, or I'm actually pointing to the right, off on the right somewhere. E-commerce is run as a silo. You know, campaign and media is run out of a different department. And at the end of the day, all that does is cause fragmentation for consumers, which does not help drive conversion from an experience design perspective. So what we mean by this, again, every touch point offers a comprehensive story if the user wants it. Never put it in the way of a checkout, never put it in the way of a cart, never put it in the way of an add to bag button, but certainly using content at all points through your ecosystem to pull people through a funnel is very critical. And then again, to the point on experiments, building a framework and a measurement framework that indicates which users engage, which users don't, on what visit, with what type of content, what works better on what environments. Maybe video works much better in distributed Instagram environments versus, you know, product specs and flats that people can zoom in and click around on to really get a sense of what a product is on the PDP and sales environments. So it takes us to our third and final principle, which is really around building business intelligence to better serve customer needs. You know, this is the part that is internal facing, but it drives so much revenue and optimization when you think about leveraging this business intelligence in the consumer funnel. And what we mean by that is, you know, CRM needs to be fully implemented throughout the ecosystem to collect and build audience profiles across touch points, meaning leveraging and tying the data together from what happens on your own social, what happens in paid media, site activity, and email activity, tying that together to create segments, to create profiles, to create cohorts, and then to build personalized and responsive environments that cater to those. So for example, in an email, you may want to send out 7 different email variants on a new product launch to 7 different segments with different content on each of them, maybe driving back to a PDP or a category page that, depending on where that user is coming from, orients a bit differently. I think obviously the test and learn piece is critical. So some examples of who does this well, you know, Everlane does this very well. If you're a fan, you know that not only did they begin business intelligence collection before a product is even live, where they talk about what product is coming, they take pre-orders, they get a sense of demand. It really helps operationalize their supply chain and their distribution, because they can get a really good sense over years of, you know, pre-order to actual sale data, you know, how much they should be making. It affects price point. It brings consumers into the product development process. It allows permission to respond back to consumers. If someone says, yes, I'm interested in this product, I can't wait till it comes out, I'm interested in a pre-order, you now have permission to re-engage them, which is incredibly powerful as a tool for marketers and for revenue generating in e-commerce, and they really do everything to guide and inform. They do a great job of personalizing. They do a great job of product recommendations by leveraging past purchase behavior, as well as content interaction to drive what sort of recommendations you're going to see. I might see a completely different set of recommendations than perhaps my wife would see, because we've bought different things, we've signed up for different pre-orders, we've engaged with different content, etc. So where to begin on this? Obviously, this is the non-sexy part of this call, but a unified product and service taxonomy is really important so that you can leverage it across all those different touch points. It really matters when trying to drive personalization, when trying to drive conversion, when trying to drive data collection, segmentation. Having unified taxonomy around your products and your services that you can put at every touch point really, really matters. And then again, the test and learn practice to take it through. And that's something that you need muscle memory for, and you need people who know how to do it. Yes, our agencies can jump in and help fulfill that. We can run the tests, architect the tests, work on the testing strategy and implementation, but building up muscle memory internally as well for how to look at results from tests, what learnings are important, what aren't, and then how to implement success and failure, because that was a great point by Nick, so that we don't either repeat those failures or operationalize those failures and maximize the successes across the organization is critically important. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to the Q&A section.
That was great. Thanks so much, Mike, Joel, and Nick. I think it was a great representation of how we get started, testing and learning, and then also building out that interactive full experience for clients. We did have a couple of questions come in, and I'm just going to go ahead and read these, and we can throw them out to Mike, Joel, and Nick. The first one being, what are the biggest mistakes of CRO and UX currently happening by normal blue chip customers? So Mike, do you want to start off there, and do you have any thoughts, or we can turn it over to Joel and Nick?
Sure. I'll start. Well, it's a good question. It's hard to say what the common mistakes are, but there are definitely patterns that we see that don't work, that people stick to. I mean, certainly putting too much content or putting too many choices in front of a consumer in a sales funnel or in product discovery so they become overwhelmed and abandoned. That's a big mistake that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Another mistake that's very common is not being thoughtful about where you're driving people to your website. Do you want to put them in at the product detail page? Do you want to put them in at the category page? Do you want to put them in at content? Does it have to be a one-size-fits-all sort of linking strategy, or can there be differentiation and segmentation in that? That's another big mistake. And I think the third and final that I'll talk about, and then I'll pass it over to Nick and Joel, that we see is really just overcomplicating the purchase funnel. And I don't mean that by content. I mean, just making it hard to understand what to do next. That's core UX thinking. Making sure the flows are clear, making sure expectations are managed. If I'm in step 1 of a checkout and there's 4 steps, let me know that there are 4 steps, and don't surprise me with like hidden steps along the way. And we see that happen a lot.
That's great.
I would
Nick, Joel, you have something to add?
Yeah, so I think Nick's got more to say to this than I do, so I'll just quickly jump in. I think just the ultimate goal always with all of this is make, if you're an e-commerce site, make your product easy to buy. Just make it easy to buy. That's all you want to do. You want to make it as easy as possible for somebody to come there and do what they're going to do, which is to buy your product. So putting some thought and research and analysis into what's actually happening on your site and how people are moving through it, and whether they're, first of all, do you understand their goals when they come? Is it an informational visit? Are they still kind of trying to consider and figure out what they want? Are they ready to purchase? So making sure you're collecting data in the right way to enable you to kind of understand that better, and then crafting the experience to suit that, goal-seeking behavior. And then just taking as many barriers out of the way as you can to somebody accomplishing that goal. I mean, I think that often a simple flow is kind of set up, and then it more or less isn't touched again for years sometimes, when actually, as we've kind of seen through what Mike and Nick are talking about, there are quite significant gains that can be made, both in terms of sales and also in terms of branding. The internet and e-commerce is now pretty mature, and good UX is really a signal to the market of a brand, of a good brand. If you're investing in great UX and in making things easy for customers, that signals to those customers that you are a serious business, an ongoing concern of high quality. So it's worth investing in. Nick?
Yeah, I think to both of those questions, answers, I would just add, I think the two things that I would pick out from like mistakes that I see sometimes from blue chip. I think these two main things would be getting mobile right, or like taking. I think often people kind of brands will won't pay enough attention to mobile and the particular like design solutions that optimize mobile throughout that kind of throughout the site, because typically design will start with desktop and then you'll build a responsive version, and the responsive version the logic of the responsive version will be that it is a responsive version of the desktop version, and then taking that device type, which is often the majority of sessions on lots of e-commerce websites, particularly in retail, and optimizing it for the device for mobile. I feel like that's a mistake that sometimes not doing that, I think, is a mistake that brands sometimes make, or actually often make, to be honest. I think navigation is absolutely critical, and I think it speaks to just echoing the points already made. I think it's about making the journey as easy as possible, and I think that often navigation can be laden with assumptions, which aren't tested, and really really testing the assumptions of your navigation and the whole way that that's presented is really, really important, especially for the new users who are discovering your brand for the first time.
Fantastic, thank you. I think this one might be for Mike, just coming in. What is your feeling on AI on an e-com site? Is this too much information for the consumer? What I mean is buy patterns, users who bought this item usually buy this item or in this size and color. Do you have any thoughts on AI, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly, we would always advocate for using as much information as possible to be as specific as possible to an individual user and servicing his or her needs with recommendations or page hierarchy or offers, etc. And AI has a role to play in that, no question. I think there's two things to keep in mind when you're thinking about employing AI to help drive recommendations or sort of personalization. One is you just want to make sure you don't filter bubble people. And that's real easy to do. It's really easy to eradicate like sort of serendipitous discovery when you get too focused on driving someone down a specific silo in a specific way. Remember, one of the joys of shopping is discovery. It's finding something new that you didn't know you wanted. That's like the human emotional side of it. For years, e-commerce has been driving towards like transactional, but we can't forget that there's a human and a pleasurable side of just shopping as well. And so, being careful with how severely you restrict people into very specific experiences or recommendations using AI. That's number one. And number two is just make sure you do a lot of testing and learning around AI. It's still fresh. It's still hard to implement into e-commerce platforms, and it still has a lot to learn. And we have a lot to learn on how to use it and leverage it. So I would say, testing and learning is a critical piece of that, and also tying it to the rest, making sure the data that's driving the AI comes from broad sources. I think it's very important to not just limit it to what's happening only on your website. And I'm sorry to be repetitive on the ecosystem thinking here, but it's just how we think. Tie your marketing data to it, tie what content is being interacted with in social, in CRM, etc., so that you can get a better holistic picture of consumers as you employ it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that also leads into another question that just came in around ecosystem, and maybe you can just add a couple of thoughts there, but how would you change a fragmented experience run by different teams across an ecosystem to a well-designed experience for users? I think that plays in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Certainly, Nick and Joel, jump in with thoughts, please. Look, I think I said it when I was going through it, so I don't mean to be redundant, but when organizational structure gets in the way of best-in-class consumer experience, there's a problem. And when CRM is in a silo and e-commerce is in a silo and performance marketing is in a silo and social's in a silo, the only person that loses is that company's bottom line, because you're not able to effectively organize around consumers. And so people talk about personalization and being consumer first or user first, et cetera. You can't do any of that when all that stuff sits in a silo. So the first challenge there is an internal organizational one. And when people talk about digital transformation, you know, this is one of the major pieces that they talk about. How do I change the way my organization functions, manages data, looks at the consumer, aligns around KPIs, treats the ecosystem? And once you have that, you know, aligned, it's much easier to deliver a best-in-class experience across touch points and leveraging the holistic ecosystem, for sure. And they don't have to be sequential. You can work on both of those at the same time. But the truth is, you'll never be completely successful until you fix the organization in addition to the experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I would just kind of maybe pick up on a couple of points that Mike was making there. So one is around the KPIs, or to put it another way, to align incentives, to properly align incentives across the business so that everyone is motivated to achieve the same goal. So that is, I would say, absolutely fundamental to getting that to work. The other thing is around data and use of data. So collecting data such that it is available and has clear use cases for all those different functions. Because that, again, is almost forms part of the incentive, whereby everyone can see the value that they can gain from coordinating in that fashion, and everything is pushing towards the same end. So I think very hard about incentives, and I think very hard about collecting data in a, you know, GDPR and CCPA, whatever it is, California, sure, a compliant way. But making sure that you are doing that and that you are also making it a kind of available and usable by those different functions.
That's great. We have had a bunch of questions come in. I'm going to go to another one around what do you guys think about the balance between brand and e-commerce to drive business? Common question, right? How much brand, how much e-com are people spending on, and measuring pure revenue based on MTA or other forms of measurement? You all have some thoughts on that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, so I'll kick off. Obviously, as with any worthwhile question, the answer is it depends. It depends on the brand. It depends on the stage of the business. It depends on the near and long-term goals of the business, of course. There is, if people are not aware of it, there is some really excellent research that has been carried out. I mean, since I think the first published in 2012, maybe, but recently, like last couple of years, redone, called The Long and the Short of It, which is by Les Burnett and Peter Field. It is, I would say, a kind of a seminal piece of work where they analysed the value of short-term activation-focused activity, I think in the context of this is what you call the kind of e-commerce side, and long-term brand-building activity, and were able to demonstrate how those two things work together, and that in shorter timeframes, activation, revenue driving, short-term revenue driving, ROI-focused activity performs better. But once you get past a certain point, 6 to 12 months, actually the return you get from the long-term brand building is significantly better. So because businesses tend to focus very hard on the quarter and the next quarter, and because performance marketing in particular makes it seemingly quite easy to track and measure everything and the effectiveness of everything, although there are some notable gaps in actually what really is being captured there, a lot of focus goes on that. We can see the money we're making, we can see the pound or dollar we put in and the $2 or $3 it returns. Let's just keep doing more of that. Actually, that ceases to become as effective over a period of time, and unless you are employing actively chasing brand objectives that will exist over 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you are limiting the total amount of value that you can extract from the market. So Quite what that balance is depends on your business. The kind of rule of thumb that they devised was 60-40 brand versus activation. 60% long-term investment, 40% short-term investment. But as I said, that will differ by industry, by business. So that's roughly what I would say.
Super. We have only about 5 minutes, but we do have a bunch of questions. So I'm going to try to just get through a couple of them, specifically the anonymous ones, so we can make sure we follow up. What gimmicks have you seen gain momentum over the past few years, but actually haven't worked in your experience? For example, browser push notifications, QR codes, and the Honey extension. Anyone have any thoughts? We can always give it some more thought and get back to everyone.
QR codes is a great example of fail. I mean, who doesn't love beating up QR codes? Gimmicks, the reason they're called gimmicks is they don't work. So,
yeah.
I would say there's endless examples of gimmicks, but I encourage our clients, and when we work with our clients on this, we really try to focus on unmet consumer needs, or like problems that consumers are having, or they don't even realize they're having, that we can solve in the funnel. Sometimes that's product information, sometimes that's brand building, sometimes that's hardcore UI UX stuff. But we try to really focus around understanding the behaviors of our consumers on our platforms to drive conversion. And that really kind of puts gimmick stuff to the side.
And I think a follow-up to that might be around, a question here is around how do you select the right client for us to work with, whether it be Coder or Forward. Example being like a client that doesn't have any testing environment, et cetera. So, is there any direction we can give to clients around how we believe they should be setting up their environments so we can work with them to effectively put something in place? Anyone have any thoughts on that? I sort of answered the question.
We'd love to work with any and all clients. Let me start with that. But additionally, no, I mean, like, certainly look, and obviously Joel and Nick jump in, but the first thing we do when we engage our clients and when we start projects with our clients around e-commerce is, we do a strategic define of where are we today? What do we know about our users? What test and learn platforms do we have in place? Is the tech stack right? How's our organizational workflows? We start there so that we can prioritize and solve the right problems. And sometimes it is about, wait, hold on, we're not even at baseline in terms of test environments or having the right data set up or looking at the right KPIs, et cetera. And sometimes, it's way past that, and it's actually about reinventing the experience design. But we start with every client engagement with a strategic phase to identify and prioritize the right problems.
Something I would add to that is before experimentation, get your data collection and analysis and reporting up and running, so that you can analyze that properly, so that you can then propose experiments. Is key. Definitely a prize step.
Yeah, and I think that goes to there's a couple questions around when you're a growing company with limited resources and can't officially create a full ecosystem. How do you get started? And I think Mike and Nick, to your point, like, we have different methods, right, of getting people up and running in sort of a short, mid, and long-term way. Is that what you guys suggest? Yeah.
I would also suggest that I would suggest getting your measurements sorted out first, getting your analytics sorted out first, the tagging and so on and so forth. That's absolutely, bedrock necessary. And then before you move on to the more advanced. Potentially, I think probably it's for most brands, before you move on to the more advanced implementations like personalization, start small, start with A/B tests, build the organizational confidence, and this is a method, and that means you then have the business case to move on to more and more advanced implementations as you go on.
Okay, great. So this was wonderful. Getting a lot of questions is always a great indicator for us. We will figure out a way to address these questions either personally or in a group setting. We are just about at time. Mike, Nick, Joel, thank you so much. Are there any closing thoughts, or just everyone can reach out to us if you need anything? Thanks so much for their time, kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming through. Thank you for the questions. As Mary Beth says, we'll endeavour to get them all answered.
Yeah. All right,
Yep,
this
for
was
sure.
great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.